Hello everyone, my name is PJ and welcome back to another episode of The Hoarder. As you can see, I have updated the pictures of the crew to represent their current gear and appearances. I was going to wait until I had more parts and put them all in one video, but something happened at the end of session 17, so I wouldn't get too comfortable with this image. In the last session, the party bought so many magic items that it's reasonable to expect I'd forget one. Chit bought a decanter of endless water, meaning that not only are their water troubles over, they're already scheming lots of crazy uses for it, so it will most likely come up later. On the morning of Elysius X, after all their crafting and shopping were done, everyone in Gundeborg expected Aviaturus to return, which is why King Redax was boarding every single villager he could, plus half his remaining guard, onto his only remaining ship. Their instructions were to sail out to sea for a week, then return only if Gundeborg hadn't been destroyed, otherwise they were to go to the Sword Coast. Tilda, Haljal, and Falgar all joined them, but Porzish seemed to have it in his head that he was sticking with the PCs. You see, Porzish knew that the paint would start to peel off the fake gold coins very soon, and he didn't want to be anywhere near the villagers when that happened. And even though he had no combat training, Porzish was willing to risk traveling through hills of necromantic terror at the PC's side, then guarantee a lynching from everyone he deceived. The PCs could think of no conceivably reasonable way for Porzish to travel with them safely, so Serge recommended staying with the king. Porzish agreed, but not for the reasons the PCs expected. When he got to the castle, he asked to be locked up in a cell deep underground where Aviaturus couldn't get to him. The day passed uneventfully. Everyone did their own thing, but of particular note was Zaymot, who hung out drinking wine in the now-abandoned tavern, leaving money behind for the barkeep to collect when he returned. While there, he was visited by 4 canaries, who Zaymot tried to talk to and be friendly with, but they seemed to just be ordinary birds. By the next morning, Arvayaturus hadn't shown, so the PCs said goodbye to His Majesty and ventured northwest, following the beach. Serge stayed in the center of the formation, holding the lantern. That afternoon, they came upon a small cave covered with signs of civilization. Curtains to prevent wind and snow from blowing in, a short barricade to keep the snapping snow from spreading inside, and a makeshift garden of potted plants hanging from the trees just outside. Stepping inside, they could see about a dozen corpses of commoners and guards, flesh still on them, so they didn't die from the snow. They could see some obviously magical items further down the tunnel, plus a chest at the far end. As Serge approached, walking on the wall, he just barely managed to dodge a cluster of large maggots that had been hiding on the ceiling, which attempted to drop onto him. Chit instantly recognized the maggots for what they were, and told Serge to get away. Now, all the PCs had to do at this point was stay back and let Serge spam Firebolt until all the rot grubs were dead. That's not what they did. Each one wanted to contribute, after all, which means they stepped forward to engage them in melee. Although several swarms of rot grubs managed to get into Chit and Balthazar's spaces a few times, none of them ever managed to land a hit. And it's a good thing they didn't, because if one had, that character's player would have probably spent the rest of the session rolling up a new character. Even though it was an easy fight from which no one took any damage except one point where Balthazar critically failed and hit Chit in the foot, it was still a stressful experience for everybody. For winning, they found a belt of dwarven kind, which Balthazar attuned to, a +2 pike, which Chit claimed, and a chest full of treasure, including a marble and pearl statuette of Arvayaturus, complete with tiny rider. Serge decided to store the entire treasure inside his ring, since he can do that now. They travel further, and as they're getting ready to set up camp, a parrot shows up and begins squawking at them. "Rah! Help! Rah! Help!" before flying to the south. The PCs almost considered ignoring the parrot, but followed it anyway. After about an hour of forced marching, they come across a small patch of dirt that hasn't been covered in sapping snow yet, and sitting on it was a terrified and starving polar bear. Balthazar approaches it and tries to calm it down, but fails miserably and angers it, causing it to try and make the dragonborn its long-due meal. Chit grappled the bear to hold it still, and Elton gave words of encouragement, the help action, to Balthazar in his next attempt. After Balthazar and Chit hug the bear into submission, it finally calms down. The parrot, who'd been watching, flies down to the dirt and transforms into a female half-orc, who introduces herself as Yvelda. She explains that she is on a mission to save stranded animals from this island's killer snow, but had no way of safely moving something as heavy as a polar bear. But with the party's Lantern of Radiance, they should be able to get the bear to the ocean. But before they do any of that, the party sets up camp. That midnight, everyone in the tent is woken up by Elton's short sword of warning, as well as the frenzied cries of Yvelda, who was outside on watch. When they step outside, they see Yvelda and the bear engaged with 3 humanoid constructs, each fully armored and equipped with shield and poisonous sword. Yvelda and the robots are fighting at the Lantern of Radiance's threshold, meaning no one can go out to flank them without touching the sapping snow. This makes it very difficult for anyone to hit these 20 AC targets, especially since their new allies are in the way, granting half cover. This makes it very easy for the robots to down both Yvelda and the polar bear, who, by the way, Serge named Paul. Not a problem for Zamoth, though, whose prayer of healing and preserve life managed to keep everyone alive long enough for Chit and Balthazar to destroy the robots. Serge tried to help, but for some reason his spells kept bouncing off the robots, but not Zamoth's spells. The PCs go back to sleep and try to finish their long rest, only to be interrupted yet again early in the morning. Chit is on watch when he sees 24 wolf skeletons approaching the campsite from all directions. He manages to take out 2 of them right away, but just as the short sword of warning wakes everyone up, Chit and the polar bear are surrounded. The polar bear goes down easily, and Chit himself ends up taking 32 damage in the first round, bringing him down to 9 right away. When Zamoth's turn came up, it was finally time for him to use his newly learned Destroy Undead. His holy symbol fires random beams of light in all directions, disintegrating every wolf skeleton they pass through. With this single action, 14 of the wolf skeletons were annihilated. However, the remaining wolf skeletons did not falter. They attacked the polar bear's unconscious body, killing him. And Zamoth, now out of 3rd level spell slots, was unable to revivify him. With a cleave here and a cleave there, and another accidental critical failure with Balthazar's large longsword to Yvelda's face, followed by more healing from Zamoth, the fight was over. The PCs had failed to protect the polar bear. Sullen, but still grateful to the heroes for risking their lives, she gave them a pouch of gold pieces, then flew off to try and find more survivors. When the heroes finally finished their long rest, they set their sights on the huge mountain to the northwest, which, as I'd previously pointed out to them, had living trees growing on it. Session 17. For this session, Balthazar's player George was absent, so when the rest of the party wakes up, they find him to be mysteriously missing. He was the last one on watch for the night, so no one saw where he went. Rather than actually try to look for him, though, which if they did they would have discovered that there were no footprints anywhere, they just automatically presume him dead and move on. In the previous session, the party made it their plan to go up and over the mountain, since that's where Yvelda told them the mining colony was. However, when they reached the base of the mountain, I began explaining to them what mountain climbing entails. I'd intended to consolidate the entire day's trek into just 2 checks, one for climbing and one for keeping balance. And I told them that if either group check failed, the party would suffer some potentially lethal falling damage. The players were having none of that, and decided to go around. By dusk, a random wilderness encounter was supposed to happen during their travels. I had decided in advance that if they were near the shore, they would encounter a crew of kobold pirates trying to find a place to bury their treasure. But if they were on the mountain, they'd encounter yetis. The party was in neither of those places, having elected to stay as close to the mountain as possible while remaining in the sapping snow. So, I improvised. The party's passive perception was good enough to notice that they were being followed, but all their attempts to bait out their pursuers failed. They decided to force march for another hour and see what happened, but nothing did. So they pretend to go to sleep for the night, with Chit keeping first watch. After about an hour of waiting, the creature emerged and tried to sneak up on Chit, who turned around to see a Yeti skeleton. And it wasn't alone. There was a second Yeti skeleton, one that downed Surge twice in the same combat. God, wouldn't it suck if one of the PCs died so soon after I made these new images? Despite being the fight's biggest victim, Surge came out as its MVP, with his blunt damage dealing catapult spell, which he used snowballs for, dealing double damage to the skeletons and shattering them to pieces. The next morning, as they continue northward, using the mountain and Chit's compass to completely prevent getting lost, they spy some lanterns in the distance hanging from some trees. When they get closer, they see that the lanterns are actually magical lights, surrounding an empty field in a perfect circle. Surge, with a knowledge check I rolled for him, recognized the magic lanterns for what they really were. Will-o-wisps. Malevolent spirits that led people to their doom. They decided not to enter the circle and simply go around, a detour that cost them an extra hour of time. Finally, they reach the northwestern corner of the island and find the remains of a settlement, which they soon after learned was their destination, Baranzo. Surge turns Zaymot invisible, who uses his winged boots to fly up and over the area to survey it. The cliff Baranzo was built into is a few hundred feet above sea level. Most of the buildings are dilapidated save for one. There are 8 15-foot diameter holes dug deep into the ground, all spaced an equal distance from each other in a pattern. The westernmost hole is on a steep slope, and slipping on that would mean falling a couple 100 feet into the frigid ocean. One of the holes, the one nearest the upkept building, had a large tower with a wheel next to it that held up a cage that acted as a lift. First things first, Chit decides they should eliminate every creature patrolling the area. They start with 2 more of those robot things they encountered 2 nights ago. Then they have a ranged door with a pack of 7 skeletons, while Zaymot uses Destroy Undead to instantly annihilate a group of 7 zombies. After that, they realized they desperately needed a rest. So instead of retreating to a place that they know is safe, the PCs head straight for the aforementioned building. Peeking inside, Chit spots a middle-aged woman dressed like a pirate, and since he wasn't trying to be stealthy, she notices him immediately. In fact, the 2 of them recognize each other. The woman's name is Bertha, and she was a member of Salvador's crew. She invites them in, playing the gracious host despite having become a vampire, as she and Chit catch up on what's been happening. She reveals that Salvador hasn't made his move after all these years until now because he was waiting for Chit to finish repairing the highwayman so it could be delivered to him in one piece. Chit thinks this means the highwayman is an operational spelljammer again since Salvador has both it and the crystal rod, but Bertha shoots that theory down, as Salvador is not yet a powerful enough artificer to create a spelljamming helm, though he has constructed a new device using the crystal rod. She also reveals that she is unaware that the highwayman still had a crew member aboard, something she finds very interesting to know. The 2 converse for a while and they try to be diplomatic, but it becomes apparent that Bertha, still loyal to Salvador, won't accept anything less than Chit's complete cooperation and the death or imprisonment of his friends. They've come to an impasse, and everyone readies their spells and weapons. Chit goes first and is able to deal quite a bit of damage to Bertha in the first round, but not enough to draw whatever qualifies as her blood. Meanwhile, Surge is almost grabbed by a shadow, whose flat hand detached from the floor to reach for Surge's ankle. When Bertha's turn comes up, she fills the area with a huge dome of magical darkness, blinding everyone inside. But since that also makes everyone invisible to each other, it cancels out everyone's advantage and disadvantage, allowing for universally standard rolls and making opportunity attacks impossible. Unfortunately, it also makes most of Zaymot's healing impossible, so he settles for casting Spirit Guardians, which I should mention, used up his last 3rd level spell slot. You remember what happened the last time he used all his 3rd level slots? While the rest of the party is dealing with shadows, namely Elton, who had a point of his strength score drained away, Chit is going toe-to-toe with Bertha. Bertha approached Chit and grabbed his shoulder, instantly dealing 4d10 necrotic damage with no save. Chit was already badly wounded when he came in here, but Chit didn't just fall to 0 hit points. Anyone dropped by a necrotic attack from a vampire or a shadow is instantly killed. And what's worse, in a vampire's case, the victim's shadow detaches from their corpse and becomes a free-willed monster, giving Chit's still living friends another enemy to deal with. Bertha turns away from Chit's body and heads over to finish off his friends. But, for reasons unknown to him at the time, Chit regains consciousness. He finds himself in a dreamlike stupor where he doesn't need to breathe and all his wounds have been fully healed. He stands to his feet and rushes Bertha, pike in hand, to try and finish her off. Shocked by his sudden resurrection, she casts some kind of ice spell on him, and even though it hits, Chit doesn't feel it at all. She turns and runs for the door, but a quick verbal warning to Surge gives him the direction he needs to Eldritch Blast her, even in the magical darkness, killing her and causing her body to explode into ash. As the magical darkness fades, the party sees Chit's face and their reactions give him the confirmation he needed. His skin was now parchment white, and his eyes a milky white. His skin felt tougher, he'd grown fangs, and his thirst was gone. Chit, the former wild space pirate, had returned to the mortal realm as a vampire. Upon hearing this, Grizzletodd spoke up and congratulated Chit on his transformation, talking about how great it is to be a vampire. He proceeded to list all the wonderful benefits of being one, but also made sure to mention the few minor caveats that came with it. All the changes to Chit's character are as follows. He now counts as undead instead of a humanoid, which means all spells that specifically don't affect undead or constructs, like Cure Wounds, for example, no longer work on him. He gains a +2 natural bonus to his armor class if he's not wearing armor. He is now vulnerable to radiant damage. He is now immune to cold, necrotic, and poison damage. He is now immune to the charmed, poisoned, and exhausted conditions, meaning he can no longer take a level of exhaustion to act while incapacitated. So he can no longer use that house rule. He now has dark vision of 120 feet, with no sunlight sensitivity to offset it. He now has spider climb and can walk on walls and ceilings. He no longer needs to breathe or drink, but he does still need food and sleep despite what the flavor text says. He now has a natural spell attack, an energy drain, that can be used at melee or range to deal necrotic damage, and if this attack kills a humanoid, it will create a free-willed shadow, one that'll most likely target his still living friends. And lastly, If Chit ever drops to 0 hit points again, his body will explode into a cloud of necrotic dust, leaving behind no corpse for Zaymot to revivify. He was lucky to come back this time, but the next time he drops to 0, it's over for him. After that, the party searches the building, which appears to be an office of sorts to direct the mining operations. There's a few flasks of oil, some lanterns, some rope, hard hats, and a book on mining safety, which Serge takes and decides to start reading. They barricade the front door with the immovable rod, then sleep out of sight of the windows. Later, a pair of robots would come by and look in through the windows, see nothing, then move on. The rest of the night passed uneventfully.